Have you ever had that feeling that there's something more to reality than meets the eye? Like what we experience with our senses is just a tiny part of something much bigger and more mysterious.
It's a question that's fascinated people for centuries, this idea that there might be a hidden layer to existence.
We'll get ready to dive deep, because that's exactly what we're exploring today on the deep dive.
And today's exploration is going to take us into some really fascinating territory.
We're going to be taking a look at this, let's call it a significant historical document, a manuscript that's packed with esoteric knowledge.
Right, a kind of guidebook to understanding some of the deepest mysteries of existence.
And you, our amazing listeners, have pointed us towards a particularly intriguing section. We're going to be focusing on pages 106 through 121.
These pages are a goldmine of profound insights.
We're talking about the limits of science, the enduring power of ancient wisdom, and the fundamental connection between everything seen and unseen.
It's a deep dive into the very nature of reality itself.
So buckle up, get ready to expand your mind, because this deep dive is going to be a wild ride.
We're starting off with a look at a specific period in Western intellectual history, the rise of positivism.
Positivism. Okay, remind me what that's all about again.
So positivism was this idea that the only true knowledge comes from scientific observation, what you can see, measure, test in a lab.
It's all about the empirical evidence.
Exactly. And some of the big names you'll recognize are Comte, John Stuart Mill, and Tyndall with his Fragments of Science. They were like the champions of this way of thinking.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. If you can't prove it scientifically, how can you really know it's true?
Right, that was the basic premise. But here's the thing. The text points out how quickly some of the most hardcore positivist claims ran into some serious problems.
Oh, like what? Give me an example.
Well, Comte himself, he famously declared that we would never, ever be able to figure out what the stars are made of.
He said that. Wow, how'd that work out for him?
Not so great, actually. He even used this fancy Latin term, ignorabimus, meaning we will not know. But just a few years later, along comes spectral analysis and boom.
We cracked the code of the stars.
Exactly. What was once considered absolutely unknowable suddenly became known.
That's incredible. It really shows how much we don't know and how what we think is impossible today might be commonplace tomorrow.
Right. It's a powerful reminder of the ever-evolving nature of knowledge and how we should always be open to new possibilities.
That's a great takeaway for our listeners too, right? Stay humble, stay curious.
Absolutely. And the text goes on to make another super interesting point. It says that even some of the most famous scientists who were into positivism, like Newton, Pascal, Kepler, Descartes, these guys were brilliant, but they also had personal beliefs that went beyond the purely material.
You mean they were secretly mystics?
Well, maybe not secretly. The text calls it a mystical pole of positivism, this kind of hidden current of spiritual thinking that ran alongside their scientific pursuits.
It's kind of blowing my mind to think about those giants of scientific thought having this other side to them.
I know, right? And the text even throws in this awesome quote from Newton that really gets you thinking. He said, "Only a little knowledge distances one from God, but much knowledge leads one back to him."
Whoa. So the more we learn about the universe, the closer we get to God. That's deep.
It is. It suggests that the pursuit of knowledge, if we take it far enough, might actually lead us to a deeper, more spiritual understanding of reality.
It really challenges this idea that science and spirituality are always at odds.
Right. Now, shifting gears a bit, the text goes on to contrast Western thought with what it calls the abundant light and power of Eastern idealism. It even quotes the German philosopher Schlegel to drive the point home.
Okay, so we're broadening our scope now. What's so special about Eastern idealism?
Well, the text really digs into Vedanta, presenting it as something truly exceptional in the history of philosophy.
Vedanta, that's a branch of Hinduism, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it emphasizes this amazing idea that the individual self, your deepest, truest nature, is not separate from the essence of divinity.
It's like saying deep down, we're all connected to the divine.
Precisely. And it goes on to say that this essence of divinity is perfect, immortal, and fundamentally one.
It's a powerful perspective on the nature of reality and our place within it.
And the text makes this bold claim that no Western philosopher, not even the greats like Plato, Spinoza, Kant, or Hegel, ever really reached this level of insight when it came to this specific understanding of the divine.
It's putting Vedanta on a whole other level.
It is. And the text points to a core principle that underpins this whole Vedantic framework. In the beginning could be only one. just as in the end will be only one, whether we call him Atman or Brahman.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It speaks to a profound unity that underlies all of existence.
Right. Now, getting a little more abstract here, the text starts exploring different types of human cognition, how we think and understand the world.
Okay, let's see if I can follow this.
It introduces this concept of being in prolongation, describing it as the supreme transcendental reality and primary substance.
Being in prolongation. Okay, break that down for me. What does that even mean?
Imagine ultimate reality not as a static thing, but as this continuous, unbroken flow of being, stretching through everything. That's the essence of being in prolongation. It's like the fundamental underlying existence that's always there.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
And then it explains that this being has two main aspects. First, there's the nature of the idea of divinity in its purest, most abstract form.
So like the unmanifest potential of the divine, the blueprint before the building.
Exactly. And second, there's the nature of the cosmos, the actual world we experience in all its diversity.
Okay, so it's like the potential becoming reality.
Precisely. The unformed becoming formed. And from this, the text goes on to describe two hypostases of this substantial reality, which are basically fundamental aspects or faces of this ultimate reality.
Hypostases, that's a new one.
It's a fancy term, but it's basically a way of understanding the different ways this single substantial reality manifests itself. So the two hypostases are being itself and transcendental consciousness.
Being and consciousness.
And the text really emphasizes that these two are totally inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. Consciousness is the inner nature of being, and being is what consciousness is aware of.
They depend on each other.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Right. And this leads to a distinction between the absolute world and the world of differentiated being, the world we experience.
So the absolute world is like the source, the pure potentiality.
Exactly. And the world of differentiated being is where things become separate and distinct, where consciousness exists in varying degrees of intensity.
Like a spectrum of awareness.
Yeah, and this leads to the concept of a created cosmic consciousness, which is distinct from the integral consciousness of the absolute world.
Okay, so the absolute world has this total, complete consciousness, and our world has a more limited, fragmented kind of consciousness?
You got it.
So where do we fit into all of this? Like,
Yeah.
where do humans stand in relation to these different levels of consciousness?
Well, according to the text, humans, Homo sapiens, are right smack dab in the center of cosmic consciousness.
We're in the middle of it all.
It's like we're this focal point where all these different levels of being and consciousness converge.
That's kind of a lot of pressure, isn't it?
Maybe, but it's also pretty amazing. The text summarizes the two hypostases of being, the pure being and transcendental consciousness, into a third hypostasis.
A third one. Okay, what's that?
It's described as a prototype of affirming, affirmed, and established being.
Wow, that's a mouthful. So humans are like this embodiment of all three.
Yeah, we're like this unique expression of being, consciousness, and the process of becoming.
I like that. It's a way of seeing ourselves as both connected to the source and actively shaping our reality.
Exactly. Now, the text makes a really important point about the absolute. It says that in its pure form, it's something we can't fully grasp or directly experience.
So the absolute is beyond our comprehension.
Well, in its totality, yes. But the text also says that we have this incredible ability to understand how close or far something is from that original absolute state.
So even if we can't fully know the absolute, we can understand things in relation to it.
Precisely. It's like we can't look directly at the sun, but we can study its light and heat and learn a lot about its nature.
I like that analogy.
And it goes on to say that even with the unknown and the inaccessible, we can identify certain elements based on how developed they are, how far they've moved from that original state of pure potentiality.
So we can still learn about the absolute by studying its reflections and manifestations in the relative world.
You got it.
That's pretty cool. It means we're not completely shut off from the mystery, even if we can't grasp it fully.
Now, switching gears again, the text goes on to talk about intuition, presenting it as a primary way of knowing alongside our senses and reason.
Intuition, that's fascinating. You mean like that gut feeling you get sometimes?
Yeah, it starts by bringing in the philosopher Schopenhauer, who saw philosophy as a deliberate turning back towards intuition. Like he's saying, hey, let's not forget about this powerful inner knowing that we all have.
It's like he's saying there's more to understanding than just logic and reason.
Right. And it also quotes the French philosopher Henri Bergson, who talks about how the true servant of Isis, someone who's really devoted to uncovering the mysteries, uses reason to analyze teachings, but ultimately relies on their spirit, their intuition, to really penetrate the truth.
So it's about finding a balance between the head and the heart.
I like that way of putting it. It's about using both our rational minds and our intuitive senses to get a fuller picture.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the text even brings in Plutarch, who talks about the role of intuition in understanding divine matters.
So intuition has been recognized as a pathway to knowledge for a long time.
Absolutely. And the text itself states that intuition is something we're all born with. It's there alongside our other ways of perceiving the world, but it holds a special significance.
So intuition is like a superpower we all have, but might not always use.
I like that. But there's a caveat. The text emphasizes that intuition is subjective, meaning it's based on personal experience and insight.
Right. So what's intuitive for one person might not be for another.
Exactly. Now, moving on, the text introduces these grand concepts of the macrocosm and the microcosm.
The macrocosm and the microcosm, those sound familiar. Remind me what those are again.
The macrocosm is basically the universe as a whole, the big picture, and the microcosm is the individual, the smaller reflection of that larger reality.
So like, as above, so below.
Yeah. And the text describes the phenomenal picture of the world, meaning the world we experience with our senses, as the cosmic passive environment. It's like the stage upon which all of reality plays out.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then, get this, it presents this really dense formula. Man lives in a world of realizing impulses, but through the feeling of synthesis, achieves a priori knowledge of the polarly opposite beginnings, substantial actors, lying one above and the other below his intellectual world in the order of synthesis, and together expressing the cosmic motive difference of potentials, the external active reflection of the final reality.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but basically it's saying that while we experience the world through our senses and our impulses, our deeper feelings, our intuition, can give us a glimpse of the fundamental forces that drive the cosmos.
So our feelings can connect us to something bigger.
Exactly. It's like we're in the middle with our intellect trying to make sense of things, but our feelings are tapping into these deeper, more primordial energies that are both beyond and within us.
I'm starting to get a sense of the interconnectedness here, how everything is tied together on these different levels.
Now, the text takes us on a journey into the world of ancient wisdom.
Ooh, I love this part.
It starts by mentioning an ancient Roman invocation to Jupiter. Jupiter, omnipotens, vel quo alio nomine appellari volueris.
Okay, translate for us non-Latin speakers.
It means all-powerful Jupiter, or by whatever other name you wish to be called.
That's a cool way to address the divine, acknowledging that whatever name we use is just a pointer to something much greater.
Exactly. And then it introduces this incredible concept, the sacred book of Thoth.
The sacred book of Thoth, that sounds mysterious and powerful.
It's presented as a system of teachings that reveal the stages of the one reality's self-expression, the unfolding of the divine in the world.
So it's like a guidebook to understanding the nature of reality.
Exactly. And it suggests that by studying this system, the human spirit can find its way back to a sense of lost unity, a connection to the source.
That's a powerful idea.
And the text explains the structure of this book of Thoth. It's divided into 3 parts, but for our purposes, the key is the second part, which is composed of 21 great arcana.
Arcana, those are like the cards in the tarot, right?
Yeah, they're similar, but in this context, they represent these profound principles that reveal the single reality to those who seek understanding. The text says that the first part can be understood by taking what we learn in the second part and synthesizing it. And then the third part, we can understand it by taking what we learn in the second part and applying it to the world around us.
So the 21 great arcana are like the keys to unlocking the whole system.
Exactly. And it even quotes the philosopher Francis Bacon, who said that philosophy's 3 main objects are God, nature, and man. Philosophia objectum triplex, Deus, natura et homo.
God, nature, and man. It's like the 3 fundamental aspects of reality.
Right. And our current exploration, according to the text, is focused on the first 2 parts of the Book of Thoth, the great arcana that deal with God and man.
So we're delving into the divine and the human, the cosmic, and the personal.
It's a powerful combination. The text also mentions the traditional sequence and numbering of these arcana, even pointing out the dual designations for the 21st and 22nd arcana.
Dual designations. That sounds intriguing.
It is, and the text really emphasizes that these 22 great arcana form a complete and self-contained system. Their number and order are not arbitrary. They arise from a deep underlying logic.
So there's a profound structure to this ancient wisdom.
Absolutely. Now, the text briefly touches on Gnosticism and how these kinds of esoteric teachings can sometimes become distorted over
Oh,
time.
that's interesting. How does that happen?
Well, it brings up the figure of Simon Magus, who was a really important thinker in early religious history, but whose teachings ended up being misunderstood and misrepresented by some early church writers like Origen and Tertullian.
So, like, they twisted his ideas to fit their own agenda.
It's certainly possible, and the text uses this example to illustrate the challenges of preserving ancient wisdom accurately. Sometimes powerful ideas get lost or distorted, especially when there are strong opposing forces at play.
It makes you wonder how much wisdom has been lost or misinterpreted throughout history.
It's a sobering thought, but the text also highlights a major discovery, the Philosophumon manuscript.
Philosophemon, what's that?
It's a manuscript written by a bishop named Hippolytus, and it was found in the 19th century on Mount Athos. This discovery was huge because it shed new light on Gnosticism and helped correct some of the earlier misconceptions.
So we got a more accurate picture of what the Gnostics actually believed.
Exactly. What was once dismissed as nonsensical ramblings turned out to be profound philosophical and spiritual teachings.
That's amazing. It shows how new discoveries can completely change our understanding of the past.
Now, the text draws a connection between these Gnostic ideas and the Kabbalah, particularly when it comes to the concept of divine emanation.
Okay, so the Kabbalah, that's Jewish mysticism, right?
Yeah, and the text explains how the teachings of Egyptian priests, both directly and through Kabbalistic traditions, along with Greek philosophy, influence both Neoplatonism and Gnosticism. It's like this fascinating flow of ideas across cultures and time periods.
It's amazing how interconnected these different traditions can be.
And the text highlights that this idea of being, this ultimate reality that underlies everything, was a key concept that was transmitted through these various streams of thought.
So being is this fundamental idea that connects all these different schools of thought.
Exactly. And the text even throws in another quote from Simon Magus, who said, "God is the totality and the primordial source of the potencies of being."
So God is the source of all that is.
Right. It's a powerful statement about the nature of divinity. And then hold on to your hats because this next part gets kind of wild.
Already, hit me with it.
The text introduces this concept of she existing before being, a pre-existent nothing.
She. Okay, who is she?
And it's not referring to a person or a goddess or anything like that. It's talking about this state of pure potentiality before creation, before anything existed. It's like a void, an emptiness, but not in a negative sense.
So the ultimate blank slate.
Yeah, something like that. And the text makes it clear that this pre-existent nothing is completely separate from the world we know, the world of being.
It's outside of reality as we understand it.
Exactly. And then it quotes St. Martin, who talks about God's eternal and unchanging nature, contrasting it with our temporary existence. It's really emphasizing the vast difference between the absolute, the divine, and the relative world we experience.
It's reminding us that we're just a small part of something much, much bigger.
Now, the text delves into this really fascinating idea. World creation as an aspect of the self-consciousness of divinity.
So the world is like a thought in the mind of God.
It's more than just a thought. It's an expression of God's own being and awareness. The text even says that world creation is itself an aspect of divinity, the creative divinity.
Okay, so creation is not separate from God. It's part of God's very nature.
Exactly. And through this creative act, the unfathomable first cause, the ultimate source, affirms itself in its differentiated aspects, in all the diversity of the world.
It's like the divine is reflecting itself in everything that exists.
Precisely. And the text says that the link between the source and the manifestation is the idea of thought. This leads to the doctrine of Arcanum the First, which states that the creative divinity connects the absolute, the unmanifest, to the manifested world, the world we experience.
Arcana the first of the great arcana.
It's the foundation of the whole system. The text explains that as humans, we naturally move away from trying to understand the unknowable first cause, which is beyond our comprehension, and instead focus on understanding the creative divinity through the principles and laws of creation.
So we study the creation to understand the creator.
Exactly. And the text goes on to elaborate on Arcanum the First, revealing this profound doctrine. The origin of the world is the consequence of the divine essence desiring to know itself in creation. It's like the universe is born out of a cosmic act of self-reflection.
Wow, that's beautiful. So the universe is a way for the divine to experience and know itself?
It is, and this desire for self-knowledge is reflected in what the text calls world passivity, which then becomes dynamic, active, and is perceived by us as the triune creative divinity.
The triune creative divinity, the three-in-one God that appears in so many traditions.
Exactly. And the text emphasizes that this trinity is reflected in the first three great arcana, forming a dynamic ternary that underpins all religions on earth.
Okay, that's fascinating. So the first three arcana represent this fundamental threefold nature of the divine.
Exactly. And it uses this great analogy of a fountain to illustrate this concept. You have the water surging upwards, reaching its highest point, and then flowing back down to its source.
It's a cycle of creation, culmination, and dissolution.
And the text gives examples of this threefold principle from different cultures. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva in Hinduism, the three parks, which might be a reference to the Moirae or the Graces, the three Norns in Norse mythology, and the daily paths of Osiris, Apollo, and Phoebus in Egyptian and Greek mythology.
It's like this universal pattern of a threefold divine that appears in different forms throughout history and across cultures.
And now the text shifts its focus from the divine to individual consciousness.
Okay, so we're zooming in from the cosmic to the personal.
Exactly. It explains that each individual consciousness, each monad, is like a tiny spark of the larger cosmic divine self-consciousness. It's like we're all little drops of water in the vast ocean of divine awareness.
So we're all connected to this larger consciousness.
And the text says that this individual consciousness, this monad, arises from nothing, when the possibility of limited being emerges within the divine consciousness.
So we come into existence when the divine becomes aware of the possibility of individual being.
And the text calls this primary divine creativity the revelation of these individual consciousnesses.
It's like the divine is creating these little pockets of awareness within itself, each with its own unique perspective.
Exactly. And the text goes on to say that the self-affirmation of reality continues through this universal family of monads, all these individual consciousnesses interacting and affirming their existence.
So the more we become aware of ourselves, the more we contribute to the self-awareness of the divine.
It's a beautiful idea, this interconnectedness between the individual and the divine.
And the text quotes Spinoza, who said, "The intellect of God and the things understood by that intellect are one and the same."
It's a powerful statement about the unity of the divine mind and creation.
And then it brings in the Kabbalah again, specifically the first three Sephirot: crown, wisdom, and reason.
The text explains that these three Sephiroth are ultimately one, representing knowledge, the knower, and the known, all within the divine realm.
It's like a self-contained understanding, a complete loop of knowing.
And it contrasts this with the knowledge of creations, which are separate from the knower and depend on external objects for their understanding.
So God knows itself directly, while we have to learn about things through our senses and experiences.
Exactly. And the text emphasizes that everything that exists is connected to God and found within his essence, making him the prototype of all existence.
So everything comes from God and ultimately reflects God's nature.
Now, getting into some mind-bending territory here, the text starts talking about the relativity of perspective and the world of binaries.
Relativity and binaries. Okay, I'm intrigued.
It uses this great example from astronomy, Ptolemy's Earth-centered view of the universe, Copernicus's sun-centered view, and our modern understanding that the sun is actually moving through the galaxy towards a star in Hercules.
So our perspective on something as fundamental as the movement of the planets depends on our point of reference.
Exactly. It shows how what we perceive as absolute can actually be relative to our perspective and how much we've synthesized.
Right. And the text goes on to say that the principle of the binary, the idea of two opposing forces or perspectives, is fundamental to how we perceive reality.
But each specific binary exists only within the realm of the relative.
So what seems absolute from one viewpoint might be seen very differently from a broader perspective.
Exactly. And the text states that the world of binaries is the world of reason, because reason operates by comparing and contrasting, by affirming and negating.
So our rational minds are constantly working with these pairs of opposites.
And it's within reason that these binaries are born, and it's also where they can be neutralized or resolved.
So reason can both create and dissolve these dualities.
Now, things get a little more complex as the text delves into the nature of the partial ternary.
Okay, partial ternary, that sounds like a head scratcher.
It is, but let me try to explain it in a way that makes sense. The text describes a partial binary as inherently unstable because the two opposing forces within it are constantly pushing and pulling, trying to define their relationship.
It's like two magnets with opposite poles are always attracting and repelling each other.
Exactly. And these resulting interactions, these objective aspects, are also binaries in themselves. But their binary nature only becomes clear after the objectified aspect, the concrete manifestation of this tension, what the text calls the partial androgen, is revealed.
So it's like a seed with two opposing potentials that manifests as a single sprout before we can see the duality within it.
That's a great analogy. And this leads to the first law of the partial ternary, which states that every phenomenon, everything we experience, arises from the interaction of these bipairs, these pairs of opposites.
So there can't be a phenomenon without a binary, and vice versa.
Right. And the text quotes St. Martin, who says that the thesis, the initial idea or proposition, has its own inherent independence, while the antithesis, the opposing idea, is just a shadow or negation of the thesis. It's suggesting that there's a kind of primacy to the original concept, the starting point.
Okay, so the initial idea is like the seed that gives rise to the duality.
Now, the text takes us to a really crucial concept, the neutralization of binaries and the birth of the logos.
The logos, that's a big one in philosophy and theology.
It is. And the text explains that neutralizing a binary means affirming and restoring the essence, the archetype, the original blueprint from which those opposing forces emerged.
So it's about going back to the source, to the unity that underlies the duality.
Exactly. And this process is examined from two perspectives. Its true essence in the realm of spirit, and its outward manifestation as reflected in the sphere of reason.
So it's happening on both a spiritual and a mental level.
And the text says that the culmination of primary world creation, the moment when the universe as we know it comes into being, is marked by the birth of the Logos.
Okay, so the logos is like this pivotal force that brings the universe into existence.
Exactly. And it describes the Logos as having a dual nature. Its higher aspect is connected to divinity, reflecting all the divine attributes, while its lower aspect is connected to the cells, the individual entities that make up the created world.
So the logos is like a bridge between the divine and the created.
And there's this critical moment described where divine consciousness, responding to a cosmic pulse, emanates from the higher synthesis, and the boundaries of these cells are established, effectively fragmenting the previously unified consciousness into a multitude of individual realities.
It's like the Big Bang of consciousness where everything separates and becomes distinct.
And each archetype, each potential within the divine, becomes a real individual consciousness, a monad, with its own unique power. The text states that this collection of individual consciousnesses is the createdness of cosmic divine self-consciousness.
So the universe is born out of this fragmentation of the divine consciousness.
And while this createdness is just a potential in the first three, Arcana, it becomes a reality in Arcanum the Fourth, the birth of the cosmic logos.
So Arcanum the Fourth represents the moment when the universe solidifies into individual beings.
Exactly. Now, the text explores the substantiality of manifestation and life.
Substantiality, you mean like the inherent reality of things.
Right. It explains that the fact that the manifest world, the world we experience, is real is a direct consequence of the substantiality of the divine essence itself. Because the divine is real, its creation is also real.
It's like the divine is stamping its reality onto everything it creates.
And the text says that this substantiality of manifestation is the primary attribute of divinity, expressed in the vitality of the created world.
So the life force itself is a testament to the reality of both the world and its divine source.
And the text quotes the Vedanta Sarasadanda, which says, "The power of the divine spirit is concealed by his own qualities." It's suggesting that the very attributes of the divine can sometimes veil its underlying essence.
It's like we get so caught up in the details, the manifestations, that we forget about the source.
And then the text defines vitality as the self-sufficient existence of a given factor, its ability to express and realize itself.
So life is all about self-expression and self-realization.
And it quotes Leibniz, who said, "Where there is self-manifestation, there is life or vitality."
So to truly live is to express our unique essence in the world.
And the text goes on to describe the primary substance, the divine essence, as affirming its being conscious of itself and living within itself, independently of any specific manifestations.
So the divine is complete and self-sufficient, even without the created world.
Right. And because all other forms of being only become real through their relationships or their attributes, the primary substance is unique in its absolute self-sufficiency.
It stands alone, the source of all.
And while the divine exists outside and above the world is still its perfect likeness and reflection, containing the potential for everything that exists.
So the world is like a mirror of the divine.
Exactly. And the text connects this idea to the Hindu concept of pralaya, the cosmic cycles of creation and dissolution, the days and nights of Brahma.
It's like the universe is breathing, expanding and contracting, manifesting and dissolving.
And now the text introduces the law of the assembly of individualities.
Okay, another law. What's this one about?
This law states that the totality of reality, all its aspects together, reveal more about the absolute than any single individual ever could.
So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Precisely. And the text explains that this assembly of individualities, all these unique beings interacting, forms a higher order of being than any individual could achieve on its own.
It's like a symphony, where each instrument plays its part, but it's the whole orchestra that creates the beautiful music.
And it lays out this law. The assembly of individualities is a holistic system, representing a being of a higher order than each individuality separately. Within this system, all separate particulars are connected by indissoluble bonds. Each of them is continually transformed and reborn through its interactions with others, developing its unique properties to a relative maximum, always conditioned by the overall order of the cosmos. At the same time, each individuality outwardly expresses from its own essence that which can resonate and harmonize with the expressions of other particulars. When all these aspects are considered together, they create a holistic, indivisible, common chord for all particulars.
It's a beautiful description of interconnectedness, how everything is influencing everything else, and how this interplay creates something greater than any individual part.
Now, the text focuses on the active and passive principles as they appear in humanity.
Active and passive, what do those represent?
By act